Morning everyone, welcome to Goodlord's webinar on how legislation changes could help grow your business. My name's Lauren, I'm in the customer success team here at Goodlord, managing our enterprise customers. For those of you who don't know Goodlord, we're a technology company that provides an award-winning lettings platform and services and products to improve the renting process for the agents, landlords and tenants. Our platform helps agents be compliant in a variety of ways, including up-to-date contracts, automatic distribution of key documents such as the How to Rent Guide, secure online payments with client money protection, full GDPR support, calculation of deposit caps and more. We ensure our platform is updated whenever new legislation is released. Before we get onto the main event, please note this webinar will be recorded and emailed out later today. And if you have any burning questions, please do tweet us at SoGoodlord and we'll do our best to answer them. Today's webinar is going to focus on post-tenant fee ban revenue, deposit alternatives and disputes, acquiring and retaining landlords, and legal updates and compliance. And as you can see, we've got a lot to cover in this webinar, and if it's of interest, we will organise further webinars on each section individually. We're very lucky today to be joined by both Paul Shamplina, who's the founder of Landlord Action and brand ambassador of Hamilton Fraser, and Suzy Hershman from mydeposits. Are you both there on the line?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. Do you both want to introduce yourselves for us?
Yes, shall I start, Suzy?
Yes, go. Paul.
Okay, so I'm Paul Shamplina. I am the founder of Landlord Action. I've been helping landlords and letting agents for over 25 years, dealing with problem tenancies. I started a company called Landlord Action, and we've done the best part of 35,000 to 40,000 instructions for landlords and letting agents when there's problem tenancies. And 2 years ago, Landlord Action became part of the Hamilton Fraser group, so I became brand ambassador. And so I do an overview sales wise and as a brand ambassador role for all our brands.
Done.
Great.
Okay, my name is Suzy Hershman. I am head of dispute resolution at mydeposits, and I've been with the company now for 11 years. Started as an adjudicator, so I have a lot of experience in dealing with disputes, and moved on to education around the industry, not just disputes, but just legal updates and things like that. So across the board, really dealing with complaints and disputes.
Perfect. So a lot of experience on these topics between the both of you, which is very exciting. I actually read this morning about the new product that Hamilton Fraser is launching. So Paul, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So look, we've had our license for mydeposits since 2007. We protect 1.2 billion pounds worth of deposits, and we protect over 160,000 landlords deposits, 3,500 letting agents deposits. Obviously, the no deposit schemes and alternatives have come into the marketplace. Our CEO, Eddie Hooker, who effectively the guru of deposit protection, was looking to see how a lot of these schemes were doing it. Our background is insurance, and we decided if anyone's going to do it and do it properly, we thought that we would do it and enter this arena. What we have done with regard to our product of Home is the tenant can pay it monthly rather than an upfront payment for the actual policy. And of course, with all our experience with adjudications, which obviously Suzy heads up, we have a wealth of experience in this marketplace, and I want to make sure that the tenant has a really good experience, and of course educating the landlords and letting agents on the way.
Oh, sounds great. And you mentioned all the experience you've got. I know that Hamilton Fraser has some other brands as well, so you just want to briefly touch on those too?
Yes, I will do, and that's why I wanted to bring my business, Landlord Action, over to Hamilton Fraser to be part of a bigger company. We're based in Bournemouth. We have 210 employees, so we own mydeposits, which obviously is a government scheme since 2007. We also own the property redress scheme. We have now 13,000 letting agent members. That was now mandatory on the 1st of October 2014. Our third scheme, which was mandatory, was Client Money Protect. That was mandatory on the 1st of April. So we have 3 government schemes. We also own total landlord insurance, and we bought a year ago a website called Landlord Zone, which I overrun as well. And we've just introduced letting agent training called HF Live, doing events for CPD points for independent smaller agents. And we are launching a letting agent advice line called HF Assist the first quarter next year. So we are very busy, and our job is not just selling products, but also supporting agents, especially with all the massive changes in the private rental sector.
So lots going on with you guys, very, very exciting. Thank you for those introductions. I think we're going to move on to the main talking points of the webinar now, starting with the main challenges that agencies have seen over the last 12 months. So in your opinion, what challenges have had the biggest impact on agencies in the past year, and how should they be combating these challenges? So Paul, do you want to kick off with this?
Yes, I will start. So, I've been involved in the private rental sector for years, like I said, over 25 years. It's unprecedented, the amount of change. There's been 15 consultations in the private rental sector since 2015. Far too many, far too quick as well. And obviously we do a lot of government consultations with people in our company here. So the legislation changes, it's never ending. It's really, really tough for letting agents, let alone landlords. But actually, it's a really good time to be able to sell your services, because landlords need you more than ever. I think making sure that you're understanding that the tenant fee ban, and more importantly, the challenge is making sure you're keeping those landlords and retaining those landlords, is really, really a key objective of going forward.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think from training all the agents that I do around the country, getting their heads around the tenant fee ban, following client money protect, agents have to be more and more efficient in their working. They have to be more stringent in their rules that they apply. They have difficulties also. I think the biggest difficulty I think they've had is talking to their landlords, explaining that they can only take a 5-week deposit in most cases. Tenants are very happy with that, but then managing the tenant and the tenancy, it all makes it quite tight for agents to keep going. We're now looking at all the alternative schemes as well, and making sure that landlords actually understand and that they are transparent in what they're offering the tenants if they choose to go down that route, is another avenue that agents have to get their heads around. So I think there's a lot going on for agents, and they need to, as Paul said, be more efficient.
I think actually, yes, there's been a challenge with the tenant fee ban, and it's reported obviously agents can lose up to 20% of their income. But I do, I've worked out, I've done 500 to 600 talks in my 18-year career of public speaking, and even speaking to letting agents now, Lauren, there's so much complacency. It's unbelievable. You've got to fight for those landlord instructions. And actually, it's all about upselling your let only to full management. I do a lot of workshops that go into agents, and there's still a bit of a disconnect. It's understanding what's going through the landlord's head and empathise with the landlord. But actually, yes, you can't charge a tenant a fee, and there is lost income. But actually, landlords need agents more than ever now. They really do. Agents are compliance officers.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think I work with a lot of customers, and obviously landlords are a biggest priority for them. And I think being efficient, but at the same time, having to have more of a conversation is definitely a challenge. But thank you both for that. Now we're going to think about the changes agencies have had to make since the fee ban came in. What do you think are the best ways for them to navigate these?
Well, I would say property technology. Obviously leading in property technology, that's what you do at Goodlord. You've done a great job with that. Property technology now is more needed than ever. Understanding and keeping up to date with the property technology, how you can actually save time, especially smaller independent agencies. They obviously have tighter budgets, and actually, you think about everything you have to do prior to letting a tenancy, all the key deadline dates that you have to comply with, the gas safety certificate, how you do an inventory, how you put deposit and key. It's endless. So you need that support, and you need to be able to save time, and actually save time on the front line to actually try and think about, how do we market? How do we find that? Landlords don't grow on trees, Lauren. You've got to go and hunt them down. We have a massive database of landlords across all our networks. Okay, we are a supplier, but obviously if anyone knows letting agents, we know letting agents, and you need to be able to find how you can go and get them. You've got a network, you've got to write a lot more content, and what is really, really important is putting a price on your time, and actually how can it free up some of your agents and change their working day to be able to market more. And more importantly, the first thing an agent should be doing, and this is what I teach in my workshops, is how do you sell and upsell a let only to full management service. You need to try and accomplish 100% of your book into full management. And there's not a big price difference. You think net only is 8%, full management is 12%. There's 4% different in full management. And no landlord, Lauren, wants to be able to take a call from a tenant that's drunk and they've lost their keys at 4 in the morning. They'd rather an agent take that call. And I think that has to be communicated more by agents. We will give you a peace of mind, because a landlord, no news is good news.
I just want to add to that. I think with the efficiencies that agents now have to work with, they need constant education. We are at the moment with the tenant fee ban in the transition period, so there's different rules applying now.
We just launched a course as well.
Yeah, we just launched that course on the tenant fee ban. We obviously, coming to the end of May in 2020, some different rules apply to deposits, and then fees are separate to that. But also from an agent's perspective, they need to be upfront. They need to be more and more transparent. They want to sell their services, but landlords are reluctant to pay because they're having to pay more management fees and things. So the services they then choose to top up with, such as inventories, was originally a big concern for inventory companies that I do work with. So, but actually the reverse has happened. From what I'm hearing, more landlords are choosing to take up those services to make sure that they get their money's worth. So it's an interesting about turn from all the sensational press we were having pre-tenant fee ban.
So it's actually the averse, and it's a massive opportunity if landlords are taking up these services. You know, that 4% that you mentioned, Paul, across a whole portfolio could make a massive difference to an agent.
But,
but actually, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, what it is, Lauren, you're quite right. I mean, if you work out the 4% extra for full management, and we do absolutely everything, and I teach this on my course, is agents don't shout about themselves what they do. They do an unbelievable job. They are unsung heroes. Okay. They are what a portfolio and a buy-to-let, whether you've got, I mean, 90% of landlords have 1 to 2 properties, and they don't see themselves as landlords, okay? If an agent listed down what they did during the course of full management or a 6-month tenancy, we'd be cutting loads of trees down, okay? But they don't actually talk about it and shout about it enough, okay? You're always going to get the landlords that don't want to spend money. We can't come, you know, you can't. But what you have to do, if you've got a landlord that's calling up 20 times a day and he's paying a let-only fee of 7%, you need to be harsh on yourself as an agent and think, you know what? If you want me to carry on doing it, you need full management, or I can't act for you. And you have to be big enough and bold enough to be able to turn work away if it's eating into your time to be able to find other work.
Yeah, for sure. That time is very, very valuable. But that actually leads on quite nicely. You've touched on it a little bit already to the last question, one of the last questions on this point, which is how are agencies actually overcoming the loss of revenue, kind of in your experience?
I think they're working harder in finding new business. They need to look harder. And not being complacent is the key, really, to being very aware of what they need to do, what the rules are, and they need to be listening to webinars and open to education and reading the property press. They need to be upselling things like rent guarantee, for example, is a really good one. I don't know whether, Paul, you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, look, actually, historically, majority of agents have been undercharging. So when the tenant fee ban came in, and I know I've got loads of pals that own agencies, I've got a pal that owns 11 offices and manages 4,500 properties. First thing he did, he put his fees up 1%, and actually only lost 2 landlords. And obviously, you didn't have to be the brain of Britain, Lauren, to work out that rents will increase. Okay, they had to increase, and over a course of time, they were going to increase. You know, so rent increases, justifying rent increases, and actually, if you're providing a good service for the landlord, you know, he can offset it against tax. He will pay the extra digit, possibly 2 digits, but you have to justify it. But you've got to explain what you do. I mean, I did a talk last week for an organisation for 65. There were 65 letting agents in the room. And I said to them, I said, how many of you know what your average void period is from taking instruction to renting out your property? Not one person in the room could tell me. As a landlord, and I am a landlord, I want to know if I'm going to go to an agent, it only takes me 6, 7, 8 days. You know, I want to be able to have that peace of mind. So agents don't shout about what they do enough. And I know I've repeated myself, but it's really important. And landlords just want to make sure they've got a really good pre-qualified tenant, which you agents put in, They want to make sure their rent's paid in time. And statistically, a tenant will stay in property longer. It's a fact. I mean, the average time for a tenant to be in a property is 4 years and 1 month, as per the housing survey. So these are facts, and these are things that agents should be shouting about to their landlords, especially if they're new landlords or trying to upsell their full management service.
Perfect. Thank you both for that. We've actually got a question that we received from one of our participants on this. They've asked, if a tenant wishes to change the terms of their tenancy, say to move in a partner, can we charge them for a new tenancy agreement or not?
A new tenancy agreement, if you're amending the same tenancy agreement, then the guidance, the Tenant Fee Ban guidance is very clear. You can charge to amend the tenancy agreement. So I'm not quite sure if we're talking about a renewal, a new tenancy agreement, or an amendment to a tenancy. For a change of sharer, I would suggest just an addendum, and you can charge up to £50.
That includes VAT, unfortunately.
It does include VAT, but what the guidance said, it has to be reasonable. So if it is just a question of just crossing out a name and adding another one in, you have to question whether that is a reasonable fee. I suggest that agents will probably charge the maximum.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, with my property redress screen hat on the advisory council, so we have 13,000 members, as you know, a quarter of our complaints is about management service and poor communication. I mean, communication is a big problem for landlords and tenants about letting agents. As the tenant fee ban has come in on the 1st of June, we're now entering December. We anticipate that come the new year, we're going to start getting complaints about agents and charges with regard to the tenant fee ban.
Let me just stop you there. We've already had some holding deposit issues.
Right.
Okay, so we're looking at cases where landlords are taking holding deposits. They're still saying, agents are taking holding deposits, still saying they're non-refundable. They haven't actually grasped what the legislation is there to do. And we've had to go back to them, and we have managed to resolve them without going down the decision route, because there is still this lack of understanding, there's lack of almost head in the sand mentality for some of the smaller agents particularly. And conversely, with some of the larger agents, maybe the education hasn't been clear enough to some of the staff on actually what the rules are. So I spoke to someone yesterday who talked about a particular fee. It was actually a renewal fee, and they were not allowed to charge for it. And the lady had to remind them who she was and which company she worked for, and that they can't charge for it. And this was a reputable agent in the area.
Can I just add one thing? I might be a bit controversial. I mean, I am known to be a bit controversial, Lauren. So, and I chat a lot as well. You might have noticed that as well. But one thing that is, from working on a lot of government consultations, and I'm forever engaging with the government, the tenant fee ban came about because the government, and really there was a shift towards tenants when the Deregulation Act came in. I gave evidence and was involved in the retaliation eviction, all that type of stuff. There was a change, but the government said, you know what, tenants have been paying too much rent for too long and they need a better service. Okay, and agents need to be more professional, and we're touching that a little bit later on. But actually, with a tenant fee, there was agents that were taking a lot of advantage on tenants. So what is a tenant fee? An administration fee. It is the drafting of a tenancy agreement and a reference. And some agents were charging £500–600 per applicant. Far too much, and it's expensive. The average rent in London is almost £1,700, and you've got moving costs. And then, of course, you charge the landlord for the same fee. So the government said enough's enough. And I personally think there should have been some sort of a cap. And I know that organisations like David Cox and Arla said the same. And then, of course, it was a big bolt out of the blue when they completely capped it. So I understand why something was done, because they thought tenants were paying too much money.
Great, thanks. We're going to move on. Sorry, I know that's a really interesting point to focus on, but we've got a lot to get through today. So we're now going to talk about deposit alternatives and disputes, an interesting one. So it'd be really good to get you guys' views on this with all your experience. Deposit replacement insurance specifically has gained a lot of traction this year, but some agents are understandably apprehensive. It's a new product. But what are the benefits and risks you guys see of offering this product?
So yeah, I mean, it's more luck than judgment. Obviously, we've launched our own OME product for deposit replacement, which the tenant is paying monthly, and we look at the tenant journey. I think that at the end of the day, it all comes down to the landlord. does the landlord agree with the agent's proposal, the tenant's proposals, to take a no deposit replacement? Okay, some landlords will, but some landlords think, you know what, I want the money in the bank. Albeit I used to charge 8 weeks rent or 2 months rent. Now it's only 5 weeks. Okay, and then there could be an argument that actually, can the tenant afford to pay the deposit? You know, is that why paying it? So there is a question of affordability, and I think that is a landlord, and maybe the older school landlords. So the agents have to persuade the landlords to be able to do it. I think that there is definitely a market for it where there's rents high. A lot of build to rent operators, we work for some, are really seeing a lot of traction, and obviously having longer term tenancies makes sense. If anyone's going to be able to do it and do it correctly, that's why we've entered the market, because we've been insurance brokers since 1996. And then obviously in 2007, mydeposits with adjudications as well. So there's definitely room in the market, and there's definitely take up. And of course, agents want to be able to get commissions, but agents need to be able to make sure they're selling it correctly. What we don't want to have is another PPI scandal.
Definitely not. Anything to add, Suzy?
I just wanted to add something very quickly, actually. From an end of tenancy deposit dispute, it actually makes no difference. When I'm educating everybody, I say it doesn't matter which product you have to have the evidence to be able to resolve and negotiate with any deductions at the end, or any claim you want to make against it. I think what's being seen, though, is a bit of a concern for me, is how much agents are attempting to resolve issues with tenants rather than just making a claim against the product on behalf of the landlord. Mm-hmm. So I think the really exciting thing for me about OHM is that it's quite tenant focused, and it gives us a huge opportunity to open up all our education to tenants. So that for me is a really exciting thing, because my focus is education, and I think the more we can educate, the more people can understand, the more help they can have with dealing with any issues during and at the end of the tenancy. For me, that can only be a win-win.
And the tenant is a customer.
That's my big thing. Yeah. It's changed the focus of the, it's not business consumer, it's the customer.
No tenant, no landlord, no letting agent.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, Paul, a point about making sure that you are, the hardest sell on this is the landlord. Have you got any kind of advice on what the key benefits to them would be as an agent?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Lauren. I think you need to understand your landlord, what type of landlord you've got, and what portfolio, where's the property, okay? What type of tenant is, obviously how you profile that tenant, what type of job they're going to do, what's the work placement, and actually what's the why is that being put forward? You have to explain the benefits of the product, okay? And obviously if the product and the cover is obviously more than the 5 weeks cap, and how it's sold, and understanding the terms of the policy. You need to explain it to landlord, because everything's now about transparency. And actually, if you're selling a new product to the landlord, you need to be totally transparent. Because one bit of advice I always say, my years of training letting agents, going in their offices and doing those talks, is you have to retain and keep the landlord for the life of them being a landlord, not the tenancy. The days of the negotiators just wanting to do a deal and signing up an AST for 6 or 12 months is the bigger, broader picture.
Absolutely. Suzy, just to come back to what you were saying as well about handling the end of the tenancy, have you got any other advice for how agents should handle this, in addition to kind of making the claim a bit sooner?
I think the point of I think for me, when I'm dealing with agents and landlords and end of tenancy disputes, is actually understanding that negotiating and having the right evidence and being prepared for negotiation is really key. So my focus is not on how an adjudicator necessarily will work, but how you can deal with your tenant on a much softer, kinder, customer-like basis.
But presumably it's managing the tenant's expectations,
well, it's managing well as the landlord.
Yeah, but it's both.
Huge.
It's a bit of, exactly.
It's huge for managing the landlord's expectations. The fact that the landlord's still on so many levels, and so many agents will agree, landlords think they can take whatever they want from the deposit, that it's their money. Yes. And it's still
and you're doing loads of calls up and down the country trying to educate not just letting agents landlords, but you know, you talk about betterment, they think a carpet, you know, has a lifespan of 5 years. They've got a carpet of 10 years, and they think they should get the total amount back they paid 10 years ago.
Yeah, the mindset is changing. It's changing the mindset, and getting the tenants to understand that crayons on walls are not wear and tear.
Oh, mate. Oh, I better stop writing on the wall.
Yeah.
Great, thank you both for that. We're going to move on now. We touched on landlords quite a lot there, but we're going to move on specifically to acquiring and retaining landlords, which is obviously very, very important for a lot of people watching this. There's a lot of pressure on landlords now, which is affecting many agents' stock. So there were actually quite a lot of questions that came in about this topic. What are your views on acquiring and retaining landlords?
How long we got, Lauren? So look, you know, I wrote a book called The Landlord's Friend, and I like to think that I've done a lot of campaigning, and I do it. So it's firstly, you understand your landlords. So still, agents are very complacent generally. When I do my talks, I say, how many of you go out to networking events? How many of you go to the council? How many go to property investment talks? How many of you go to NLA meetings? And I do a talk, and 4 or 5 hands go up out of 50, 60 people, which for me is not good enough. You have to network. You know, I was taking my dog for a walk 2 months ago around the block. A postman stopped me. He recognised me from my programme on Channel 5, started talking to me. He's a landlord. He's got 9 properties, and he's a postman. Okay, landlords are everywhere. You have to engage. You have to network. You have to build your brand up. So firstly, getting yourself out there, and then of course, what is important, I write loads and loads and loads of content. Agents don't write enough content. They are buy-to-let experts. I know my area. I know that I rented a property from you, Mr. Landlord, that made an inquiry 3 weeks ago, and I achieved this X amount of rent, and I'll make sure that it's not void. Because the first questions a landlord would ask you is, how much do you charge? How quickly can you rent a property? Okay, you have a time, and they're going to call and they're going to speak to loads of other agents. And the days of an agent being full management, Lauren, 5% full management are well and truly over, especially with client money protection coming in. You know, you can say, yes, we have a good service, we do this. You know, actually, we communicate with you, we find out, and we let you know about if there's any maintenance issues, and we have systems, you know, in place where we will communicate with you about, you know, when we did our inspections, and we pay the rent the following day. Landlords want to hear all of that. So the pitch is really, really important, okay, and making sure you keep them for as long as possible. And if there is a problem with a tenant, how do you deal with it? How quickly do you deal with it? How do you manage that expectation?
How do you avoid, Paul, what would you say in terms of scaremongering, that landlords have become scared and they're worried about? Has that helped agents?
Yeah,
or
most
agents
definitely.
seeing landlords sell up?
Exactly. So look, in again, all the years I've been dealing with it, landlords are really feeling vulnerable. So have agents with the Tenant Fee Ban, you know, but actually one hand takes, another hand gives. Okay. You've got landlords now. There's now the latest figure I saw was 176 rules and regulation in renting a property out. Shall I tell you what they are, Lauren? I don't know what they are, but there's 100.
Sure, we have time for 176, but
and that was from the Residential Landlords Association. If you're going to say, you know, I'm going to protect you, landlord, and I'm going to make sure that you're compliant with HMO regulations, or the right to rent, or the Deregulation Act, you know, or the gas safety certificate, if you list down and put that information, a landlord, especially if they're full-time working, will give you the keys, because it is their biggest asset. And when they give the keys over to a letting agent, okay, they're losing control. You know, I do talks to landlords on how you should find a letting agent. So I say, go on allagents.co.uk and find out on review sites. I come from it from a different angle. So, you know, the compliance element of it and the legislation is a big, big thing. And that's what letting agents have really got to push more when they do get in front of landlords.
Great. We've got a couple of questions that were submitted on this topic. So one of them being, how can I grow my client base when new legislation is contributing to so many landlords actually leaving the market?
Fine. So look, you can't stop a landlord from leaving. I mean, look, we haven't even touched on Section 21, which I know is coming up very shortly, and that is a big, big challenge. You know, if a landlord leaves the marketplace, they do it because of not just the legislation, but the tax changes, and actually it's too much aggravation. I'm not yielding. I'm not getting the money I want to get, and you're getting a lot of landlords diversifying the market. You know, it's very hard for you to change a landlord's mind if he's, you know, if he's getting 3% yield, or it's just not working. It's not, because obviously, you know, they want to look at trying to reinvest and make more money in pensions. At least, all I can say, if a landlord is leaving, and you will get landlords in your portfolio leaving, at least make sure that you get the instruction to do the sale. you know, and if one goes, then how do you find the others? And that's being proactive and thinking out the box and thinking how a landlord will think. You know, a lot of letting agents are landlords, okay? Think about how they would instruct, and you get a lot of landlords that set up letting agents because they've had a bad experience with a letting agent. That's another issue as well. You know, poor service, or agents haven't passed on the rent. And I know loads and loads of landlords over the course of years that have ended up setting up their own letting agents because they felt that they wanted a better service and can offer a better service.
Great, thank you very much for that, Paul. Another question that came in: as an agent, how do I persuade my customers that remaining a landlord is a good idea for the future?
What do you mean by that? Say that again, Lauren.
So as an agent, how do I persuade my customers, so presumably landlords, that remaining a landlord is a good idea looking into the future?
So look, you know what? People need to sleep somewhere. You know, we have 9 million tenants. I mean, a lot of everything that's happening at the moment, we have an election, and we haven't talked about Brexit. And I know you were going to throw me off the webinar if I talked about and mentioned Brexit, so I do apologise. But it is a big issue, and everything is tenant-based. But tenants need to sleep somewhere. Tenants can't afford deposits. There is a life of them being a tenant, okay? And actually, you know, we have a lot of landlords that have moved into multi-lets and HMOs, and I've seen a huge spike of landlords moving their portfolio in the short-term let industry, like Airbnb and limited to 90 days. You know what it is? It's about longevity. Buy-to-let is longevity. People need to sleep somewhere. But landlords need to up their game with regard to their properties, because there is so many landlords out there fighting for the same tenants. You know, if you've got a good property, you've got a good agent, okay, you'll rent it. A landlord wants a property rented for as long as possible. They don't want voids, they don't want maintenance charges. More importantly, they want a decent tenant.
I think also you mentioned pensions before, but I think property is still a good investment. And I think if you're willing and able to pay the management fees, and your rents are coming in on a regular basis, and you're not losing money on the property, then it's still a really good investment.
Interest rates are rock bottom. They're it's so cheap for the money, and that is going in landlord's favour. Great.
Thank you both. You mentioned Section 21 earlier on. We are moving on now to legal updates and compliance. So what advice would you give agents for handling end of tenancy disputes? We've touched on this a little bit, but is there anything more to add, more on the kind of compliance side of things, not specifically about schemes?
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question. I think, can I come back to this one? I think maybe go on to talking about the Section 21, and then yes, I'll come back to this if I can.
Yeah, no problem at all. So we've got, obviously there are the latest plans around the abolition of Section 21, as you mentioned, and changes to Section 8 also. So do you want to just touch on your thoughts on those first of all to get started?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I'm quite at the heart of it, because I've been, I sit on a panel. It's called the Fair Possessions Coalition. It sounds like the mafia, but it's not. It's basically all the, I mean, ALA on it, the Letting Industry Council, the landlord associations around the whole country, and we've all come together. Up until maybe a week ago, we were getting an indication that the Conservatives weren't as keen to ban Section 21. There was over 20,000 submissions on this consultation, which ended on the 12th of October. I've written a lot about this. I've been involved in this. I remember issuing my first accelerated possession claim in 1999 when it came out. There's been more and more barriers, and the word non-fault, there's always a fault, but 60 to 70% of the time, Lauren, landlords are using Section 21 because there's rent arrears, not Section 8. Obviously, last Thursday I was at a conference, and there was an announcement that from Boris Johnson that Section 21 is going to be abolished, just like the other two parties. My biggest problem, and I had the government in our offices here in Bournemouth 2-3 months ago on the housing court consultation, is if you don't invest, the Ministry of Justice don't invest in the court system and get more judges and more bailiffs, because there's going to be 70% more hearings under Section 8, okay, to gain possession, then what will happen is landlords will lose confidence, and landlords may possibly look to sell up and go. I've said very clearly that Section 21 is the biggest thing to happen in the private rental sector, bigger than the Tenant Fee Ban, bigger than Section 24 and the abolishment of mortgage interest relief and all the legislation. We have to get this right. So what will happen is, it looks like Section 8, there's 17 grounds. It might go to 22, 24 grounds. We've been working as a group about how it looks post the ban, but there is some unintended consequences which the government haven't thought about, and that is that tenants are evicted under Section 21 because they're told to stay put by the council. It's a big problem, because obviously we have a social housing crisis and the private rental sector picks up the pieces. A lot of tenants evicted under Section 21 are actually in arrears, and they go to the council to try and be rehoused. And I show this on my TV programme with Channel 5 to highlight the problem. If it switches to Section 8 and actually they have a money order on their Section 8, what will happen is they go to the council to try and be rehoused, where previously they would have been rehoused or on a waiting list or in temporary accommodation. The council will turn around and say, well, your inventory is of £3,000-4,000. You've made yourself homeless. We can't help you. And then, of course, you have an issue with antisocial behaviour, where landlords will use the Section 21 rather than Section 8 because they can't get evidence. And then you'll find a lot of landlords and letting agents be much more stringent with referencing. So really, unfortunately, the more vulnerable tenants, and maybe tenants on housing benefit or universal credit, I think there could be a struggle there. So they really have to get this right.
Great. Suzy, do you have any thoughts to add broadly on the legislation or the changes to the legislation potentially?
No, I think Paul's pretty much covered it, and I think Section 21, will it have an impact? Not from my perspective, I don't think. No, I've nothing else to add to that.
Great, thank you for that. So do you want to now move on to talk about kind of handling end of tenancy disputes?
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Obviously, the principle hasn't changed, that a tenant just has to return the property in the same condition and standard of cleanliness that it was in when they moved in. Now that tenancy agreements have had to change since the tenant fee ban to take out all the unfair clauses, there were considerable concern about the cleaning clauses that used to be in contracts. Pets was another big issue that we know has cropped up since then.
You can't charge a pet deposit.
No.
So landlords will be charging more for rent, won't they?
Yes. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we've talked about this, and I know that there is trading standards this week have brought up the pet issue and whether even pet rent is reasonable, and their argument is not. But I mean, in my experience, if somebody has a pet, they'd rather pay extra rent than not
Most
have
definitely.
the pet.
Yep, I would.
So landlords need to really think about this.
There's a market there.
There is absolutely a market, and there is always in the new tenancy agreements the ability to charge at the end of the tenancy for any damage, because if it's breach of contract, not to return. So the fact that the cleaning clauses have gone and the pet clauses have gone in terms of pet deposits, it doesn't mean that landlords cannot take from a deposit or claim against a deposit alternative at the end of the tenancy. So that for me is no issue. What is an issue, and what landlords and agents really need to think about, is the evidence. It needs to be more robust than ever to make a claim, because if you don't have it, then you're not going to win. And the guidance on default fees, for example, which can go into tenancy agreements, which is the security devices and locks, and charging for rent at the end of the tenancy. Any charge that you're going to make, even under the tenant fee ban, you have to have that evidence, otherwise you cannot charge the tenant. And that's good practice across the board for anything. New carpets, redecoration, keep those invoices and make sure that you can show anybody that's negotiating at the end of the tenancy or making a decision on any of the evidence has that clear and can make a fair decision. So
great, thank you very much, Suzy. We've actually had quite a few questions come in about this. It is a big thing, and we've seen the impact of different legislation already this year. But what do you think will be the next big change in legislation over the coming 12 months for the lettings industry?
Well, I think ROPA's coming in, which is obviously making sure that letting agents will be regulated. Okay, there'll be a regulated register which the government will run. I think that makes sense to professionalise the industry. Letting agent accreditation and a qualification, maybe 15 hours CPD points, maybe even 20 hours according to Scotland. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're very proactive in this. And landlord redress is going to come in as well. The government have had that on the radar. So if you think about the unmanaged market. So the self-managed landlords, maybe 40%. There's been these figures, 40% of properties. There's what, 4.3 million dwellings or something ridiculous like that. A lot of dwellings. Is landlords have to be responsible. So there has to be redress against landlords. Agents are jumping through hoops. Why not landlords? So I agree with that, you know, and you know, we see a lot in, you know, that there's a rogue letting agent and there's a rogue landlord list. I've campaigned and wanted a rogue tenant list, and that won't happen, unfortunately. But they will be the next changes that will be on the radar. There'll be other stuff as well. We just need time to be able to bed in. But my biggest bugbear, Lauren, is you can have all this legislation, and a lot of it's political, but we have to up our game, and the private rental sector's come up to 22%. But you have to have the enforcement. You know, all the good guys that are going through the hoops and doing what they're doing. And, you know, we've all come across a letting agent down the road called Nick and Scarpa Lettings, you know, that have nicked the rent and they've closed up shop, and then they've ended up getting away with it, and trading standards haven't, you know, moved quick enough. And of course, it's not, there's no joined up thinking. So we need to make sure that, you know, if all the political parties are talking about we need to do this and we need to do that in housing, we really need to make sure there is a sufficient money for support with regard to enforcement, because a lot of it is just you know, it's just paper talk.
Perfect, thank you. Another question that we got in from one of our attendees, they've said the abolition of Section 21 will result in the private rental sector abandoning its support for social housing overnight. This will affect the most vulnerable and needy the most. What will the government do to stop this happening?
Well, I think I answered it. So, you know, I mean, I totally agree. So what will happen is, what can they do? Well, so we, you know, what was it? I think Labour said they're going to, was it build a million council properties? I don't know where they're going to get the money from, but, you know, we have a social housing shortage. Rents are really high. And that's why I talk about the unintended consequences of Section 21. So if you get rid of Section 21, yes, you need grounds. If you want to sell the property, want to move back in, we're even going to put a ground in for access. I mean, getting access from tenants is a big problem. So, you know, how mapping it out and making sure, and whether there's an indefinite tenancy or having a longer term tenancy, which really you need to incentivize landlords, I think, because you want to give a tenant a longer term tenancy. Well, it's a relationship. So if I'm renting to you, Lauren, I want to make sure you're a good tenant, look after the property, pay the rent on time. And once you've done that, then we can have a conversation about a longer term tenancy. It makes sense. But I do worry that, you know, if there are going to be vulnerable tenants that can't get through referencing, and landlords have much choice to think, you know what, I'm going to go with that tenant because I think they're better of a credit risk than that tenant. Then, you know, yes, you have the HMO changes, but then you'll see a lot more tenants, especially out of the southeast and London, having to move out, you know, and that's an issue as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Final question now. How do you envisage the court process and associated costs changing for the landlord when Section 21 is removed? The person who sent this in is hopeful for a positive change as they think the current system is faulty.
Again, yes. So
comes down to enforcement again, doesn't it?
Well, no, yeah. So what happens is, so you have the we're talking about housing courts. The housing courts are great on paper, and you get more judges. I mean, I know what's happening on the ground. I speak to my landlord action staff. We have 10 solicitors and paralegals issuing 600 cases at a time. 60% Section 8, 40% Section 21. If the ban comes in, let's say 2023, it's all going to come to Section 8. You know, landlords evicting a tenant is a last resort. Be very clear about that. Unless their circumstances change, they get divorced and need to move back in or sell the property. You know, there will be grounds, and there needs to be a lot more grounds under Section 8 that are made more mandatory. But you need more judges, you need more court investment, you need to have a lot more online access and make it easier. And I think that there is some really good things that the courts do. I mean, bailiffs, they work tirelessly. I mean, I was doing an eviction for the series in the last, 2 series ago in Edmonton. And there was, in Edmonton County Court in North London covers a big jurisdiction of property. There was only 2 bailiffs. So getting recruitment of bailiffs is an issue. Trying to maybe have High Court sheriffs to do more evictions and getting leave might be easier. But if you evict tenants quicker, then it just causes a problem with regard to social housing. There's a big knock-on effect. So you have to have investment, and we don't want landlords leaving the industry because they give a great service. And if they do, and if there is an abolishment of Section 21 that comes in, then what's going to happen is landlords, you know, the government and the political parties don't want homelessness, which is obviously really high, there's only going to be more, because what's going to happen is if you don't get that confidence and you think you can't get your property back, then we're going to be really busy at Landlord Action, because you're going to have loads of landlords serving Section 21s. Possibly the market might change, and then there'll be tenants that are being evicted, good tenants that are being evicted because landlords want to sell. So then it creates more homelessness. So I just hope that the government and the civil servants understand and engage with organisations like us and letting agents to understand what the unintended consequences can be if we get it wrong.
How much, sorry, cutting across, do you think we're looking at the Scottish model?
Yeah, possibly. And the Scottish model is that they invested in the tribunal system. They got rid of their equivalent Section 21. There was a backlog in cases, but they invested in the tribunal system. But the Scottish, population's 5 million. Their private rental sector is much smaller. Their social housing sector is much bigger, and that's most of their evictions. So you can't compare it with England. And obviously, Wales are going in, and they may change in regard to Section 21. You have to invest in the court system. And I know from speaking to a judge in Leeds, the time to do when you do an accelerated possession case, it used to be, I remember, 90 seconds, 2 minutes to grant a possession or look through the paperwork. Now she said it takes 15 minutes. And the problem is to recruit judges. There's a problem with regard to morale. There's a lot of mental health. There's more violence in the courtroom. I mean, people don't see that. So trying to recruit judges is an issue. Housing court on paper seems great, but you need investment. If we don't get investment, we don't get confidence.
Great, thank you. Time flies when you're having fun. We've come to the end of our questions, but have either of you got anything else that you'd like to add to any of that?
Suzy,
no,
anything else?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah, we have covered. I mean, just my message to letting agents: you do a great job. Don't be complacent. You need a strategy to find more landlords. There are more landlords out there trying to convert landlords and explain about how good you are. And if anyone is interested in training them, by all means, make contact with myself or with Suzy with regard to some of the courses that we do.
Yeah.
Great, thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. If anyone has any further questions, do check out our blog, which is blog.goodlord.co. We've also just released our latest ebook, which is called Dawn of a Decade, Lettings in the 2020s. It's a great read, I've read it myself. We'll send you a link where you can download it along with the recording of this webinar. And if you want to get in contact with us here at Goodlord, please book a call on the details on your screen or head to our website, www.goodlord.co. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.